Can we get some fries for the table?
Young Carter Bayless, remixed by DJ Started From Scratch with our lovely intro music, episode 3. Here we are.
How many years have you known Starting From Scratch?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I met him in the mid-90s when I moved back to Canada from Germany.
Right.
And he walked, I was at a club with my brother. That's when I used to go to clubs with my brothers when I first moved back. We had this whole relationship, my brother and I, when I came back from Germany. And it was like, do you ever see Saturday Night Fever?
Yes.
Okay, so, John Travolta's character, he's got a brother who's a priest, Father Frank, right? And there's this whole thing of Father Frank comes home and then he takes him to the club with him and Father Frank's watching him dance. He says he's such a good dancer.
Right.
And all the guys are like, Father Frank, right? And I was like Father Frank when I came back from Germany and I was going to all these clubs with my brother. And I saw Scratch, right? And he's walking and I go, dude, who's the guy with AIDS? He goes, that's Scratch. I go, oh, okay. That was before he had his teeth fixed. So that's kind of when I met Scratch.
So you knew Scratch in the 90s.
In the 90s in Brampton. So I remember going to his house.
Right.
He lived in his mom's place and he was in the basement.
Yes.
And he had wall-to-wall records.
Yes.
And he had them completely alphabetical order by genre.
Yes.
And he had everything. And my musical knowledge is deep. And we go back and forth on music. But he had big band through the Beatles, through rock and roll, through hip hop, house, disco, funk, everything. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty amazing. I'd never seen a record collection like that.
Oh, that was your first, so at that point, your brother wasn't a record collector?
Not the way Scratch was.
And
Scratch was floor to ceiling, 4 walls.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
So I know Scratch as well. Mm-hmm. And for anyone listening.
Right. Yeah. Go.
So for anyone listening, DJ Starting From Scratch is a legendary Canadian DJ. Is also a DJ for Russell Peters, traveled the world with you. You have a business relationship with him. Mm-hmm. And obviously you've seen it all, ups and downs. I knew Starting From Scratch as a kid. I was a kid who would wait for him to come home from the record stores so that I could bring a mixtape to his house and record all the songs that he got and then take it to my high school and show it off to all the people saying that I got all the latest music, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how our ecosystem worked. But I knew Scratch when he lived with his mom and he didn't have turntables. And so he would listen to all those albums with one turntable in his room. And that's how he originally studied music. And so anytime over the years, anyone was like, how did he become a turntablist, et cetera, I tell them that his knowledge actually stems from listening to all that music. So it's interesting how you, years later, met him in Brampton.
Yeah.
And he became such a catalyst for keeping all of it organized.
He's so deep on it and he's so anal about it. And still when he travels with us and he cracks his laptop, he'll get on the plane and I will watch him and he will just be organizing his Serato playlists. He'll just sit there organizing music for hours.
Yeah.
And that's what he does. He goes almost like into a hypnotic state for it. But that thing that you were talking about with regards to going over with a cassette, I was notorious for that too. Not with him, but I'm talking like in the 80s.
Yeah.
Early 80s and even possibly as early as 80 or 79 with some of the guys I knew. You'd carry that cassette because you knew they always had the new releases.
Yeah.
And you'd literally go there just to record it, just to get it, just to have it. I wasn't flexing at school with it, but you would get the music immediately.
Yeah.
And I felt a little guilty because you were kind of using them a little bit, but I did the exact same thing. You'd go over with the cassette, you'd make your own tapes or you'd get them to mix them for you. And I absolutely love doing that. I still have those cassettes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that because there are some songs that'll come up on my playlist and stuff. And I will distinctly remember going to Scratch's house, hearing it for the first time, showing it off to my friends, like as being, this is the next sound. And for me, watching how your brother is able to incorporate hip hop into comedy, that became one of those things that made me go, oh, that's the golden ticket. Because remember growing up, Black comedians were the only people that sort of I mean, I listen to a lot of comedians, but other than I'd say Stephen Wright and Howie Mandel and Robin Williams, there were mostly the Eddie Murphy, Chris Rocks, et cetera, et cetera. And those guys leaned into hip hop heavy after Eddie Murphy, right? And then your brother leaned into hip hop heavy. And it became one of those things where I was just like, how? Like, this is amazing. It's two sensibilities coming together. And it's watching Scratch have that same ascension as a result was always amazing to me.
But the comedy is an extension of his hip hop sensibility, as you say, right? Because it's all about the spoken word, right? So all of that love of the spoken word that's built into hip hop and rapping translates directly through. There's a direct through line of that into doing comedy. Because you're so focused on the spoken word of what the rappers are saying and how they're putting the lyrics together, right? That there's a direct correlation between listening to the lyrics and how, because they're effectively talking, they're not singing, right? And then that kind of informs your thought process of stringing words together and making sentences and making things make sense. And I've always seen that direct correlation between the two.
That's interesting. I've never thought about that. I love both arts very interestingly as a fan, and I've never equated comedy in lyricism or hip hop at all. In fact, I'd probably say that I consider more the idea that hip hop is full of characters in equation to comedy and thinking that way rather than say, oh, it's wordplay. It's clever wordplay. It's enunciation. It's timing. But you're right. It is very much that for comedians and hip hop artists. And if hip hop artists don't do it right each time they're doing it, then their fan base notices.
Yeah, well, they're just not good, right? Yeah. So I think that had a lot to do with it. And then our father was a big spoken word guy.
Oh yeah,
he was masterful with the way he used the English language. So that was also infused in us as well. And he was a comedy guy.
Listening to. What records?
Red Fox.
Red Fox. Who died? Broke, apparently.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. But yeah, Red Fox albums. And he loved all, the Dean Martin roasts. Are you old enough to know the Dean Martin roasts?
I know because it would be advertised on television at 2 a.m. when I was coming down.
That's right.
From my drunken nights in university.
Okay. Yeah, so Dad was a big comedy guy, big comedy guy, and he knew exactly who he liked. He liked Don Rickles. He was like all the roasts. He liked all the guys who appeared on those, Foster Brooks, all of those guys, and that also permeated our psyche.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that totally permeated our psyche.
I had a conversation with a high-level person at Spotify recently, and
hang on, you dropped a name there.
I didn't actually mention his name, but I might
Spotify.
put it.
Let me see. Get that.
That's just a brand name.
Okay.
Like you can go to Walmart too, dude. Like
Walmart's. Actually, I don't like Walmart. Freaks me out. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. There's certain places.
Walmart and Costco. They both freak me out.
Most of the world goes to that freaks you out.
Yeah, those are the two.
So back to Reality, which was a great album by Soul to Soul, which we haven't even talked about yet. No, what were we?
I went to their store in London in '89. I had a great long sleeve white Soul to Soul T-shirt, which I'm sure if I dig through my mountains of clothes, I will probably still have it.
I bet you could find one on eBay that's worth like a cajillion.
It had the gold. It was a gold print, and I absolutely love Jazzy B and Soul to Soul. Huge fan.
Really?
Yeah, it's a great album.
It is a great album. And okay, comedy. And we were talking at Spotify about audio aesthetic. And about the fact that there are things that you consciously don't realize that you grew up listening to that will always hit a nerve with you, or not hit a nerve is probably not the best. Like you will relate to, will identify in your innards, right? In all of that, regardless of where you are. And I think that you mentioning that triggers that idea that I have never paid attention to what my audio aesthetic was as a kid and how. No, I've never thought about it because
you mean the soundtrack, like what your soundtrack is from when you were a kid?
No, that part is pretty clear, right? But what I mean is like I can identify certain types of music as a result of being around things as a kid, or certain patterns in music as a result of being around. What's wrong with
this? Is like swimming. Like Man from Atlantis.
Do you know in some languages Rajhans means swan? Maybe that's my swan.
What language?
Well, like the deepest root, it means king of kings, but it also means...
Is that Sanskrit?
Creator and swan, like,
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay,
so why did Soul to Soul have a store? Like
Oh,
there's
because they
merch?
were a huge brand unto themselves
Oh,
at that time. They were a huge breakout UK black brand in '89. Like
oh,
they were a big deal. Yeah, they were a really big deal because there hadn't been a black artist out of the UK who'd done something like that, where they had branded themselves so effectively, right? Because even within the song, Jazzy B, when he talks
all right. What is
on
soul to
Jazzy's
soul?
Groove, right, and he's like, "What is soul to soul," right, and he tells the whole story of it, and it gives it that whole sort of modern mythology of who these guys are, and he did it so well that you wanted to like, I wanted that soul to soul shirt.
Do you think that there's still in this political climate, politically correct climate, room for the roast?
Yeah, absolutely,
Really?
absolutely.
You get a kick out of it still?
I get a kick out of it when it's done well.
Yeah, I feel like it's all
When
sound
it's done
bites.
well, yeah. Now it's a lot of performative stuff, and it's not organic. And when they put the roasts together, it's not necessarily people who have sort of symbiotic relationships. It's like, oh, this person's hot, we'll put them on the roast.
Right.
This person's hot, we'll put them on
It's
the roast.
cast, yeah.
Yeah, it's casting, and for each person, it's more of a. They're almost like an opportunity to shine,
Right.
It's just like, oh, I'm in front of a camera, I'm roasting Donald Trump or Mike Tyson. Here's a chance for me to shine.
Right.
This is not because him and I are friends, but when you watch the old roasts, all of those people had relationships in that sort of swinging 60s Hollywood coming out of the 50s, 60s, 70s Hollywood. So if you had, Jimmy Stewart up there and you had Barry Goldwater, most of the people have no idea who I'm talking about. They all had intertwined relationships. Phyllis Diller, everybody, Ruth Buzzy, they were all part of that same Hollywood scene, and they were all friends. So when they were up there, they looked legitimately like they were having a party,
Right.
and they were all pals.
Smoke-filled rooms.
Yeah, it was that kind of a thing. It had an organic sensibility to it, whereas now it's
Yeah.
like, who's hot? Okay, we'll get so and so, we'll get that one, and then we'll put them on a dais. And
So,
we'll do
okay,
it.
but that's the show part of it. Do you think that there exists a world where the actual comedy part of it is still like that's the television side of it that we're talking about? And I guess we only know that. But do you think that maybe in some fantasy world, like roast still exists where it's really about the craftsmanship and people?
Yeah, Jeffrey Ross still does it. He does a regular roast in LA. He does it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that still exists in a big bad way. And when it's done well, the Americans really know how to do it well.
See, that's
They're
interesting,
really, really cutting with it. It's really cool. But you have to be down with it. Like, you have to be there and have the sensibility for it. You can't have thin skin for it.
Yeah,
Sorry, I was just going to come back to your sonic sensibility about the music thing that you
Yeah,
were talking
audio
about.
aesthetic
Yeah, audio
was-
aesthetic.
yeah.
That's a nice phrase.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
So the audio aesthetic is, for example, as you've grown up, there have been things that you've unwillingly listened to that keep a part, are stored in your mind, that get triggered, obviously, more and more as a result of the fact that we no longer live in a linear place of memory. Everything that's retro to you, right, doesn't necessarily mean retro in 80s, retro in 90s. It's a feeling to you now. So your audio aesthetic, it can be triggered as a result of you trying to figure out, oh my gosh, this is so familiar. Oh my gosh, this is
Now, when are you talking about sounds, or are you talking about music, or are you talking
well,
about
music is embedded in it because
Yeah.
the sound could be the 1-800 Cars for Kids commercial, right? But at the same time, that's a song. You don't know the Cars for Kids commercial?
No, I don't watch commercial television.
It's not that television.
Is it
It's
not
the
a
most
thing?
ubiquitous radio jingle in the world.
But I don't.
1-877 Cars for Kids.
I never listen to radio.
Okay, this is not a product placement
Yeah.
because we can't get a sponsor like Cars for.
I have some sort of peripheral knowledge
do you know what
of it.
the
but
Pizza song is?
yeah,
967
Yeah.
1111.
Yeah.
That's an audio aesthetic thing. You never went and triggered. You didn't buy the single, right? That's an audio aesthetic thing. You might you're familiar with a certain type of music that your dad listened to, but you didn't necessarily follow up with. That's an audio aesthetic. The
Okay.
radio, the 680 news might have been on in your house. That's an audio aesthetic. I grew up listening to all forms of Indian music. That is what triggers some of the Bollywood stuff.
Okay. Now I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of Toronto audio aesthetic,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah, for me, it's big city noises. It's from when we went to India in the 70s, early 70s, and we stayed in Bombay. We stayed at my cousin's place, jet lagged, stay at her place, and fall asleep in the middle of the afternoon into Bombay rush hour. So it's the scooters, it's the diesel engines, it's the street sounds that I still love to this day.
And you still go back. How many?
No, but so not just the India street sounds, but also like when we're in London, I had a cousin who lived right in the city, and I remember staying in his flat, and it was right within the square mile, which is technically like right within the city, right? And
his apartment,
the city, right? The city, but in London, there's something called the city, which is the square mile of the original city of London, and it's called the city.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so that's where like St. Paul's Cathedral is. And that's called the square mile, which is the city of London.
Huh.
Right. And he lived there. He lived right by Tower of London. And he had this flat, and they had huge open windows. And out on the street, you get all the street noises, which to me is musical. And it's a combination of scooters, diesel, buses, car horns, industry, everything. I still to this day love that street noise.
Huh.
That
you
really,
ever put it on YouTube?
No, I have to go to sleep during COVID when I was having trouble sleeping. That's when I started subscribing to YouTube, because I was playing different sounds to help me sleep at night.
Yeah, sleep music's a big industry.
Yeah,
it is.
And I had everything from rainstorms, snowstorms. I had another one where it's a train. It's just a train noise, like you're on a train, and that's another one that's influenced me heavily from those trips to India in the early 70s.
How many times have you been to India in your life?
I don't know.
What would you say roughly?
Maybe 10, 12 times. It's not an overwhelming amount because I didn't go from 84 until literally, I think, 2008.
And what made you finally take the leap to say, okay, fine, we'll try India?
For comedy, for touring, there was a demand. We wanted to go. We wanted to take it.
But I'm sure there was demand prior.
No, because prior to that, there was no. It all came through the whole viral growth of our business.
Right. But what I mean is, how did you know a country like India was ready to facilitate what you were trying to do?
Because we were doing data mining early on.
Huh.
Right. So data mining, and people would register on the website.
Explain to me what data mining is in 2008.
Oh, you're so techie. Not a techie question. You're just that's a baiting question too. So explain to me what you think.
Why don't
tell me more
Clayton,
about this World Wide Web?
Tell me.
Oh, Mohit, you're so
about
techie.
all your experience data mining in the early days.
Well, we did do data mining in the early days. We had people register on the website, send their email, send their city, their country, right? If they wanted to send more information, send that through too, and register for email blasts.
There you go.
And
that's exactly it. And that's to this day the original formula.
That's the original formula, and we picked that up. I stole that from Master P. Because he was doing data mining. Because he was self-producing. He was self-producing, and I couldn't even tell you one of his songs.
Make him say,
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I don't know his music, but I just sort of studied what he was doing.
Oh, you studied it?
Yeah, I studied it. Yeah, I studied it. I went to the University of Master P, MPU. But yeah, no, that's what we did. We did data mining in the beginning.
Master P because the master plan.
That's it. Sure.
Is that what the P stands for?
I don't know.
We can cut away to figure that part out.
I don't know. I have no other information.
So Master P. So you study the game plan of somebody you have no information.
Yeah, but I know what he was doing, right? And it was interesting, and that's what we needed to do.
How did you know what he was doing? Just based on record sales?
Whatever you read online, you read stuff. Information is out there. It wasn't like in a book.
He was a master of his own domain. He did his own distribution.
Yeah.
You had all of that. And he's like, he captured data to influence where he would go and promote himself.
Yeah.
And you decided we got to do the same thing.
Yeah, we just did it.
So hip hop again.
It wasn't a big discussion or anything like that. It's like, okay, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah, but it's got to be a big discussion because you're going to a country where you don't know.
No, when you're going to go on tour, that's of course the discussion. But in terms of what we were doing organically within the business, there was no great discussion of like, okay, today we're going to do this, and tomorrow we're going to do that. You just do it.
That's crazy to me.
And then then we talk about where you would like to go, and then you start to secure offers, and then you say, okay, let's.
How did you know who you could trust there?
That's a tough one. India is hard. It's hard to trust people in India. It's hard to trust Indians when it comes to business. Period.
Okay.
We are shady.
Let's start with the ones in India and then work backwards.
You got to count your fingers after you shake hands. Make sure you got them all back. But we were doing sort of smaller plays and things like that, and so we were. They were almost excursions. They were little deployments to go and see what the market was like, see what the aesthetic was like, see what the response was going to be, see if you needed to. Were they going to respond to the material? Were they going to understand what you were saying even? because, we didn't know what to expect. And this is still, 2007, 2008.
Right.
Right. And, the web was still fresh. Right. And not everyone had it there. There were select few. And obviously we were playing to those people because they had the money to come to the shows. Right. But he still wasn't sure what the response was going to be like.
Right.
But they got everything.
So, but you didn't have who was the number one comic there at the time, like
the comedy scene at that time was nascent. There it was in its infancy, so there were a few people kind of doing this and that.
Oh, there were no comedy clubs.
No, there were no comedy. There's still only just recently comedy clubs.
Yeah,
but at that time there were not comedy clubs.
I just thought that I've only recognized that there's recently comedy clubs in India. Not that I'm just seeing them.
No, because culturally too, this whole concept of spoken word, right, is not part of their overall culture in terms of comedy, right? Like it's not part of a tradition. There is an oral tradition, I'm sure, right, in terms of family history, small villages where people are semi-literate,
religion,
right? There's an oral history. There's an oral tradition, but comedy itself was not. I mean, it wasn't something that most young people aspired to even do. And most of the people we met say, I became a comedian because of you.
Isn't that interesting?
Right? That's every single person comes to pay
what
tribute.
What did they say to your brother, though?
That's funny. Finally.
You did mention aesthetics that you were really fond of and what you did to fall asleep, etc., and all of that stuff. Do you, when you travel now, right? Feel like any of these places are just never going to be the same? Do you feel like post-COVID, you've started to travel, you're back out there, you went to Japan for a bit, etc.? Do you feel like when you've gone back to a couple of places, it still feels the same, or does everything feel different?
Some places feel different. New York feels different.
Yeah.
LA feels way different. LA is not the same as it was before COVID. New York is not the same as it was before COVID. Even London was a lot quieter when we went there than it was before COVID. A lot of the places have gotten really, really quiet.
Quiet in the sense that you're just staying out of it, or quiet in the sense that there wasn't really a feeling of...
It didn't have that same feeling, that same energy that it did before.
Yeah. Tell me about that a little bit, specifically about New York. Like to me, growing up, New York seemed like such a mecca, pardon the term, for, you want to take a sip of water?
Am I pasty?
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit. I'm going to drink some water.
New York always seemed like two different places to me. It always seemed like the place that I knew people that partied and had a really good hip hop and food scene. And then it also had this wonderful history of comedy and SNL and all this stuff that I would always go and look at the NBC building and all of that stuff. But your relation to New York is through an underground comedy scene, right?
No.
Oh, it's not?
No,
okay.
Not at all.
So why don't you tell me your story about it?
I have no relationship to New York when it comes to comedy other than Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live is I'm obsessed with Saturday Night Live.
Okay.
Always have been since I was a kid. Because when I was 13, 14 years old, and I'd stay home, look after my brother, my parents would go out. My parents were very social people. So they would go out on Saturday nights. And there was a point at which, you go out with your parents because we're all going out now.
Yeah.
Because you're a certain age. And it's like, well, I'm not leaving at home. And then you get to a certain age and it's like, well, I don't want to go to the Indian dance or the Anglo-Indian dance or this person's house or that person's house. So they're like, okay, well, you're 13 now, you can stay home, look after your brother. And so part of that was sort of the end of the night, SNL, because you were allowed to stay up late. Mm-hmm. They weren't home. So, that whole intro on Saturday Night Live is stuck with me since I was a kid. And just all the shots of New York and that whole aesthetic is really, really ingrained in me.
Yeah. I totally co-sign. It was definitely that. But I guess what I'm wondering is, so no comedy in New York? Was there no... So
we went to New York initially on a family trip in, I would say probably 79 or 78. And I bought the Disco Nights by GQ 12-inch on 42nd Street at a record store. And we were staying with my aunt and her husband out on Long Island, right? And just it's very strange part of the family, but they're half Jewish, half Anglo-Indian, right? And so they were Uncle Norman and I forget my aunt's name, out on Long Island. And I remember he took my dad to the grocery store wherever they were, and said to my dad, Eric, this is a grocery store, as if we didn't have them in Canada. But I do. The main thing about that trip was buying that 12-inch at a DJ store on 42nd Street.
Yes.
That was and New York was music. New York was disco. New York was all disco to me at that time.
So when
I was too young to go to discos.
When young comics talk about having to go through New York, that's just a misnomer?
No, I mean, one of the things my brother had to deal with was being an outsider.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that he didn't come up in New York, Boston, or Chicago, or even LA for that matter.
And no attempt to?
Well, no, because he was here in Toronto. I mean, we had that discussion many times in the early days of like, when are you going to go down to the States? And I didn't agree with him at the time, but in retrospect, he was right. He said, well, I just don't want to go down there for the sake of going down there. And he can tell that history much better than I can, because I was not that aware of what he was doing. But yeah, he went down, he did, he slept on people's couches, and he did a few of the black rooms and things like that. Sometimes he killed, sometimes he bombed terribly, but it was good for him. But, But it was a conscious decision not to go down.
Right. Until Hollywood called.
Until
oh, sorry.
Not Hollywood, but until, the market kind of started to clue into who he was.
Did a trip to JFL then happen before all of that, or does JFL happen later? Like,
JFL was always there. He was doing New Faces and things like that. Even that history, I don't know that well, because I wasn't paying that much attention to JFL.
You weren't there at that point.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't something I was, that involved with.
Huh.
Yeah, I just didn't. I knew he was doing tours with JFL. I knew he was going to JFL.
Right.
But I had no sort of reference point for it, because I wasn't involved in the industry at that point. I wasn't sort of encyclopedically. I wasn't studying it.
Yeah.
It was just like, yeah, that exists. That's great.
Have you met Lorne Michaels?
No, I have not.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I would have thought
Big fan.
Yeah, I would have thought that at somewhere you would have run into Lorne.
I've been to Saturday Night Live.
I have as well.
Yeah. And
which one did you go to?
Foo Fighters were the band. So
who was the host?
That's a good question. I don't remember who the host was, but I do remember that the Foo Fighters were the band, and it was pretty cool. Robert Downey Jr. was there, because they invite you down, because we're up in a separate suite watching the show, right, with all sort of agents and managers and things like that. Bob Odenkirk's wife, who was lovely to us at the time, and not at the time, but she was but she was very, very kind and very, very sweet.
What year was this?
I've got to say 6 or 7, like early days, maybe 7, 6 or 7. We went down
2006 or 2007.
Yeah. We went down, and we were invited down to come visit, because we had a meeting with Seth Meyers.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And it was fine, but nothing came of it. But they come down, watch the taping or watch the broadcast. And I was over the moon. I was just completely over the moon. And then the Foo Fighters as well. Incredible. Then we were invited to the after party, and they were all sitting there, and Dave Grohl was there, and all the guys were there.
I wonder.
It was a pretty cool overall New York.
Yeah, moment.
It was like a really, really cool little thing to do. And so, if we never does Saturday Night Live, if I never go back to SNL, if I never meet Lorne Michaels, I'm okay. I got my fix of that one opportunity to go there, and I fully embraced it and fully absorbed it. So I was happy with that.
So I have a Saturday Night Live story. I've gone as well.
Mm-hmm.
I went. So my story is kind of weird, because I got tickets to Saturday Night Live, and it was through a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. It was 4 friends deep to finally find a script supervisor who had a contact, whatever. And the only reason we had access to the tickets was that it was the only date that didn't have the talent attached. So nobody was using their allotment for that day. So she's like, the only pair I have is this one, and we don't know who the host is. Nobody knows yet. So we're like, we'll take them. We don't care. We'll make a mission. So this is my wife and I. And then Sandy hit.
Oh, yeah.
And
so it's not that long ago.
No. There were, 5-7 years ago, whatever. So Sandy hit, and New York was power out, and we are hanging on to these tickets, thinking to ourselves, "Please power up!" Right? We show up at Pearson, not knowing if the airport's even open. Right? We're flying into LaGuardia, and we get the first flight that they open up the airport to actually get us out there. Still no word on who the host is, and still no word on whether there's even going to be an episode. So we show up at my buddy's house because we can't get the hotel that we originally booked. Power's out. They've got no booking for us.
Wow.
Show up at a buddy's house. You can stay with us. There were 7 other people staying with him because the way New York was, half of the city was dark and the other half was lit up. And sure, we got word that the show was going on.
Nice.
The host was Louis C.K.
Wow.
And the musician was fun. One night.
Fun. Yeah.
And man, was it awesome. We saw the 2-hour version, and then we waited and we saw the live version. And so Louis C.K. did a full monologue, that full set. And of course, Fun did 3 songs. And it was very interesting and cool because there was also a camera crew there, and I never could figure out what was going on. I thought maybe they were doing an SNL short or whatnot. Never thought about it, whatever. And then, so I had my New York moment. It was awesome. We did it. We watched it again. It became one of those things. But then months later, Jason Sudeikis came to a show that I was producing, Breakfast Television. And I started telling him about the time that I went to see blah, blah, blah. And he's like, "Oh, that's where I recorded my Best of Eddie Murphy tribute for Spike TV." And he and I ended up talking about the Spike TV tribute, et cetera, et cetera. Jason Sudeikis and I ended up becoming friends over that conversation.
Wow.
And so anytime he ended up in Toronto while I was still in media, he would spot me out. We would talk during TIFF. He had no social media, nothing. Straight up, Mo, how's it going? Conversations. Anyway, that's how I came full circle with SNL.
Do you watch Ted Lasso?
I don't. What? I not only don't watch Ted Lasso, but I would love to actually see him again and meet him again, because I do feel like I would have a kinship with him, but I don't watch it. My family watches it. So
you're purposefully not watching it.
Yeah.
Why?
I think I want to watch it all.
But you can now. It's 3
I know
seasons.
I can.
They're all wrapped.
Yeah. He's a big hip hop guy. Eh?
Oddly enough, I did the same thing with Ted Lasso.
Oh yeah, you didn't watch.
I resisted, and with my chat groups, everyone's like, "Oh, Ted Lasso, Ted Lasso." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not going to do it." And then halfway through the second season, I went back and watched the first season. Then I got hooked. Although season 3 wasn't as good.
It's funny. Audio Aesthetic. It's been on in my house for all 3 seasons.
There's a lot of swearing and sex and stuff in there with your kids. You're good.
My kids are not kids anymore, man.
Oh, you have kids?
I do.
Yeah. How old's your youngest?
My youngest is 13.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Because there's some fairly sexyful talk in there and things like that.
Hip hop. Anything worse than hip hop, then maybe I'll stop it. But wordplay, right? Words mean.
Your kids listen to hip hop?
My kids listen to a lot of hip hop.
But like the modern.
My kids know more hip hop lyrics than they know the geography in Canada.
Yeah, I think all parents kind of think that about their kids, though.
No, they do know.
Because my dad used to get on me.
Right. Why do you know?
Yeah, you know all those bloody lyrics, but you don't know this, that, and the other. Yeah, things like that. He used to get on me all the time.
I still do that to him. And then he says, "What's the point of knowing that?" And I say, "Well, what's the point of knowing anything then?" I stop talking.
And then you shuffle away with your head down.
Yeah, then at that point, you're better off knowing Kendrick Lamar if you don't want to actually know anything. Right.
Kendrick Lamar always sounded like a basketball player to me. I when I hear his name, I always thought he was a basketball player. Same with J. Cole, because I don't know any of their music, so they all sound like basketball players to me, and that's exactly what I thought they were, until I realized that they were rapsters.
Yeah, Travis Scott sounds like a country artist.
Yeah,
yeah. So
Tory Lanez sounds and that sounds like a bowling alley, right? And that's what I always thought. Tory Lanez, it sounds like a bowling alley.
That's
right?
actually a good idea for a
You know.
bowling alley.
Well, not
He's gonna
now. I
have to
think
think of-
he got in a bit of trouble, didn't he?
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
not get into hip hop news and
Okay.
views. But I did want to, the one thing about Jason Sudeikis that really threw me off was the breakup that he had with
Olivia Wilde.
Olivia Wilde.
Yeah.
And then Harry Styles pretty much wrote that album. That was a hit album based on Olivia Wilde. So I always got a little conflicted about it because he was a big fan of Olivia's. Like he was a real champion of hers. And
Oh, Jason.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so he must have got his heart broken. But I guess if you look like Harry Styles, you can have any woman, right?
I guess so.
Anyway,
He's
and
a
I
very-
love the Harry Styles album.
Do
So,
you?
Yeah.
See, I've never heard anyone say that.
Yeah.
He's got that watermelon sugar. What is it?
Yeah.
Thing?
Watermelon Sugar, the way it was. He's got
Again, I'm oblivious. I have no idea.
You know what? The reason you might like it is that he's obviously the child of Britpop.
Mm-hmm.
So you will listen to.
I do like Britpop.
Right. You will listen to it and say, "Oh, I could see how this is one of their kids."
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I think we're done.
Are we done?
I'm getting hungry, and I'm looking
Okay. All right.
at the fries.
Okay.
And I'm thinking that I should eat.
Okay.
So if you can figure that part out, let's rock.
Okay. Well,
Maybe
there
we should
go.
do another episode. Maybe we should do episode 4.
Yeah, we could.
Okay. So next
All right.
time, let's do
Yeah.
episode 4.
Okay. On our next episode, we'll be back. All right. Here's young Carter Bayless and remixed by Starting From Scratch to take us out of the show. And a special shout out to our very good producer, Mr. Chris Zimmerman, and the lovely and talented Julie Zimmerman. Julia.
Yeah, you're
Jay-Z.
gonna get-
We'll
you're
just
gonna
call her
get such a-
Jay-Z. We'll just call her
you're gonna
Jay-Z.
get a great edit out
Yeah,
of this by
yeah.
mispronouncing.
Yeah.
Usually works.
But it's nice to have her here. I'm quite happy.
You know, I had
that
an
she's here.
editor once got so mad at me. He erased my actual story before it went to air, and he only admitted it years after about why, and he admitted it when he was intoxicated
Why did he do it?
because he was mad at me.
What did you do?
I did a story on something that he kind of wanted to do, and he'd never told me that, and he always wanted to, and he wasn't getting his.
But he was an editor, right? He wasn't
Yeah.
a reporter or a producer.
No, he was an editor, but he
Okay.
really wanted to do the. I don't want to say anything else because
What was the story?
I can't tell you that.
Come on.
No, because then the editor will know.
Well, it's okay.
No.
So, but we don't know who the editor is. He's just an
No.
anonymous editor, as are most editors.
Next time.
On Fries for the Table, episode 4.
It's a dramatic zoom.
Okay.
You know, it's not dramatic when you do it, right? I'm talking to myself. Do we have credits? Enough credits to fill this time? We'll just go.
We're going to have to figure something out to fill that time.
We're going to have to tell people why they should be listening too.
Thanks, man. Are we going to shake hands again?
No.
Come on.
I got to go. I'm really hungry.
Okay. You should have eaten when you got here. Can we get some fries for the table?